Welcome to another episode, and you are in for a treat today. Before we kick off, a reminder to subscribe to our channels because it keeps them alive, and you'll be first in line to hear conversations like this one today. Our guest on 5 a.m. Tuesday today is Andrew Nicol. Now, Andrew is the founder and CEO of the People Matter Collective. So, they are a group of HR businesses that share the purpose of people matter, do good. Andrew lives life on purpose. He has a mantra, and that mantra is lead a vivid life to do global good. How amazing is that? He's an evocative communicator who challenges people to live and lead vividly. I just love that word, vividly, and believes that business should be a vessel for doing good. So he's a lifelong learner, has a passion for how neuroscience can be used to create lasting change. Welcome, Andrew.
Thank you.
Now, Andrew and I actually met about a year ago. So we were both sitting at a VIP table for a recruitment awards event, and we'd both been judges, which is why we got that privilege. And we definitely connected, didn't we, on that topic of neuroscience. But I think,
100%.
yeah, also I'd just come back from Italy. So it's very easy to talk when you've got two people sitting at a table who have both traveled to the same place. Oh my gosh. So let's kick off. I'm curious about what sparked your interest in neuroscience in the first place and the whole idea of personal and professional development. So share away.
Sure. Well, I'll probably start with personal and professional development. So, I mean, for one, I like school was not for me, so I'm a school dropout. So, and like I didn't read my first book cover to cover till I was in my late 20s, and so like that whole idea of personal development, from a learning perspective, was a really big challenge for me. I remember one of those like defining moments when I started business for myself and I left the corporate world. And I realized that nobody was going to pay for me to go on courses anymore. And that if I wanted to like learn, I was going to have to take personal responsibility for my own development. And then also just to really make sure that I was constantly learning. And for me, I ended up doing that through actually becoming an avid reader and doing a whole lot of learning and reading and all that sort of stuff. But also more importantly, that really kind of trying to work out, okay, how do you use your own mind to kind of like actually learn from what your experiences are? To kind of flip back to neuroscience, like I think I heard a neuroscientist speak at a random conference once, and it kind of got me all geeked into neuroscience and kind of going, oh wow, there's so much going on there, right? And so it sparked an interest in that stuff. And that's kind of like then just, I embarked on a whole lot of reading and learning and all of that sort of stuff. I think at the core of it, like I'm really excited about human potential. I think, we are created to be creative beings. We are connected beings. We rely on relationship and connectedness.
We do.
And so from a neuroscience perspective, you can learn a whole lot around that stuff. But also I'm really aware of like the human vulnerability, right? Like that nobody's got human figured out yet.
No.
And as much as we'd like to think, we have biases and good habits and bad habits and things that we just do every single day without even realizing it. And all of that kind of speaks into neuroscience. And so I just love learning in that space to help me ultimately and my team and the people I lead and people I encounter to learn and kind of, I guess, get insights and grow from that perspective.
Yeah, isn't it funny? Just heard someone speaking at a random conference,
Yeah,
and
exactly.
I really love that term, geeked into neuroscience. I feel a little bit same myself. And I love what you're saying about us all being connected. I mean, the desire to have connection, it's in our DNA. Like we actually really need it. And yes, there's a lot to be said in neuroscience about why that's a good idea.
Yeah.
So, considering that it took you a while to read a book cover to cover, and now you've embraced this learning of reading lots of books, how do you schedule your own growth time and also choose what to learn?
I think on the learning topic, like I tend to go quite deep in particular areas. I think, one of my concerns when I look at a lot of people doing micro learning, and I think micro learning is really useful, is that it's also not deep learning. And
Yeah.
so, there's been periods of time, an example is I grew up in the quintessential New Zealand house with a mum that worked part-time and looked after the kids and dad that worked, more than full-time and all those sorts of things. And so there's been times when I've like really gone deep on feminism and read a whole bunch of books around that to kind of really get a good understanding of it. And I talk about the idea of learning to the edges. So kind of reading to the edge of where you're comfortable, and learning to the edge of where you're comfortable. And sometimes you will pivot right the way out there. Other times it'll move you a little bit. But if you're not reading to the edge of what you're comfortable, then it's a lot harder to do that. I've dug into, right at the moment, I'm on a productivity buzz. And so a lot of my reading, book after book is on productivity. There's been times it's been on marketing or leadership or sales and that sort of stuff. So I kind of tend to go deep and get a lot of insights and ideas from, into one particular genre or in terms of topics and stuff like that.
Mm.
I love this idea of growth time. So I use this phrase growth time, and it's a little bit of a weird phrase. I mean, you could call it whatever time you want, lead time or whatever, but I encourage my team to try and take growth time every single week. And so growth time is really this opportunity to step out of the day to day and to go like, okay, what's going on? What's working? What's not working? How do I experiment with that? Um, and I just see it so often, and even myself actually at times, where you just head down working, doing
Mm.
all the stuff that you've got to do, and you actually don't get a real opportunity to kind of try and work out, okay, what is this? What's this problem? And pause to sort of stop and reframe what's going on. So I call it growth time. You could call it whatever you want. When I'm talking to my team, I talk about three kinds of growth times. I talk about focus time. Um, so for me, often I would say every day, I would say 90% of the days that working in Hamilton, I live in Hamilton, but when I'm working here, I will start at a particular cafe, and I will go and do focus time. So I'll actually smash out some pretty cool stuff. Very first thing when my brain's fresh, everybody knows me by my name. We have banter with the coffee people. I get a good coffee, all of those sorts of things. And so that's like focus time. It's really going, okay, how do we set apart time to actually do really good focused work? And I know
Mm.
that there I do great work and I pull off great work, and it's a great environment to work in. The next part of that is kind of like really problem solving growth time, right? Like, so it's kind of going, okay, I've got a problem. How the hell am I going to solve this problem? And I think that this is the one that people struggle with a little bit, because it's often we kind of know that something's not working properly, but we never actually stop long enough to work out what it is. And I think, a lot of that is, starting with the problem in mind, taking time to kind of work out what you're doing, and those sorts of things. The next part of growth time, the final one, is what I call blank time. And I did one of these this morning. So the way that I do blank time is it's white paper time, right? So I start with a blank piece of paper. 5 minutes before I do it, I generally go like, I write down everything that's on my mind, right? So what's on my mind? What are the things? Because we've always got stuff on our mind,
We
and
do.
that's a part of the problem. So today I'm like, oh, okay, I'm probably going to end up thinking about something like this. So I write down all these things that are on my mind, and then I kind of sit there and I go like, okay, brain, or you can go, okay, universe, you can go, okay, divine, or dream, or whatever you want. What have you got for me? And so I'm like, okay, brain, what have you got for me? And today my brain just started going, oh, your goals are all out of whack. And I'm like, oh, great. I didn't actually see that coming. But like, it's one of those times where you sit there, and people hate this one the most, because it's like the idea of sitting there with a blank piece of paper and hoping that something comes to you is actually terrifying. And some
Mm.
days amazing stuff comes to you, and some days it's just your brain, your subconscious going like, oh, crap, I've got some stuff for you, but you're not slowing down long enough for me to give it to you. And so even today, when I paused, it went, oh, my goals are out of shape. And I'm like, oh, okay. I think I knew that, but I never actually paused long enough to actually work it out. So that's kind of how I sort of think about growth time. The core of that, I guess, is getting away and actually making sure that you're spending time out of the operation, disconnected, and actually, yeah, making the most of what your brain can do for you, really, and choosing that ultimately.
This is absolute gold. And I love that focus time, the problem solving time, the blank time. Now, one of the things I've noticed, even in myself, and I'm a writer and a speaker, so creativity is part of my world. But I was visiting a friend in Palmerston North, and we usually will do some creative writing, and it wasn't flowing for me like it used to. And so I love that idea of the blank space. And don't be afraid, listeners, because this stuff works. I often talk personally about putting your hand on your heart and asking a question, and then just allow the answer to come. And if it
Yeah.
doesn't come straight away, it will come.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like you say, it's about actually pausing long enough to listen for that
100%.
answer, or
Yeah.
writing long enough that something comes, right?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
and sometimes it is, it's just forcing yourself into the action of doing it. And I think I mean, a whole lot of it is non-judgment, right? Which you hear all the time, right? So
Mm.
it's don't be judgmental of yourself. If you go into a blank space time and nothing really comes of it, who cares?
Yep.
Right? But then there's times that you'll just get absolute gold out of it. And it's again, it's using your own powerful brain to actually choose what you're going to do and what's going to make an impact for you. So yeah.
And no inner critics allowed in the space.
Yes, exactly. Theoretically, I mean, I'm my best critic.
Theoretically.
So, like,
Oh, I think that's something most of humanity has in common if they're
exactly.
willing to admit it.
Yeah,
Now, this whole idea of learning to the edges, this
yeah,
is fantastic. So, and we all know that learning can take us outside our comfort zones. I'd love to explore that, and just go nuts. Just share what feels right to you around, perhaps some neuroscience hacks or something that listeners can actually do to step outside or to push that edge.
yeah. I mean, I think the first thing is I love that phrase is that we feel most comfortable when things are certain, but we feel most alive when they're not.
Hmm.
And so there's this whole idea of like, we love being in the comfort zone, and you can't be outside of your comfort zone all of the time. But you need to be outside of your comfort zone in areas of your life, I think, most of the time, just to kind of be pressing yourself and challenging yourself and things like that. I think that's where we do most of our great learning, right? Is when we're outside of our comfort zone. And so, yeah, I love that concept. I think from a neuroscience perspective, there's some crazy stuff that goes on. So I don't know. The first part of it, when I think about the comfort zone, is are you prepared to experiment?
Mm.
And so I've got a friend that's who runs what is one of the big hospitals, and then I've got another friend who's a firefighter. And so one day I'm sitting around going like listening to what their days were like, and one of them was making decisions around where they had to fly people to get people saved because they have a massive problem in their hospital. Another one had attended a car accident. I'm realizing, oh, none of the decisions I make are life or death.
Yeah.
And for a lot of us in creative space and white collar roles, our decisions, like we can make a decision. If it doesn't work out, you can actually go back to doing it the way that it was done. And even like, when I was in the career game, we changed the whole layout of a career depot. It didn't work. After 2 weeks, we put it back. But if you don't
Yeah.
experiment, you don't know. And I think that's where a lot of people are afraid to step out and experiment. And that's what really I think it is from a comfort zone perspective. I think when I think about how do you get to to step into the space of experimenting, you first got to have ideas.
Mm.
And so when I think about neuroscience, I go like, okay, what are those ideas and how do you get those ideas? I love that. I don't know. Have you ever like been in the shower and just suddenly you have this flash of inspiration? Please
Yeah,
say.
absolutely.
But like
It's like,
I've
where's the
often
pen?
asked, yeah, I've often asked people, like I know some people have like whiteboard markers and stuff to capture ideas. But you ask people where they get the most creative ideas, and often for people it's in the shower. And
Yeah.
you're like, well, why is it in the shower? Why is that happening? So neuroscience would show us that when you're in the shower, you're slightly happy, you're not thinking about the problem. And and then you've got the space, right? Like, so you're not actually working on anything. And so then that's what kind of leads to this idea generation where your brain goes, oh, I've got this for you. Thanks for slowing down. So when I think about like, how do we get ideas to step outside of our comfort zone, you have to kind of recreate that shower moment, which is a little bit of what that blank time is, where you kind of know that you can actually kind of get insights from different things. And, some of the ways that I do that is obviously through the growth time. Um, I have this weird idea called liminal space. So there's this term called liminal thinking, and the word liminal is a Latin word. It means threshold. It means the space in between. So you imagine going from one room to another, you cross a threshold for those things to happen. And so like I have a cafe that I go to work on creative stuff that I will never meet a person there for. So the only reason I ever go to that space is to do creative thinking.
So
Uh,
they think you've got no friends then, Andrew.
yeah, I don't care. And so it's like I go to that space. So the only thing I ever work on there is creative stuff. Like
Love
I
it.
only ever go there for like either blank papering or to really kind of work on big ideas that I'm working on and that sort of stuff. And I never do any other work there. When I'm there, my phone's off. And guess what? You can actually turn your phone off because like the world is generally not going to end in the hour that you're off doing that stuff if you're on a
Love it.
plane for an hour. And so I call it my liminal space. And so, yeah, if somebody ever invites me to meet them there, I'm like, oh, I can't meet there. Can we meet somewhere else? And so it's just a way of me going like, how do I create those insights? How do I create those shower type moments that actually help me learn and grow? The next part, I would say, I'm talking a lot, but anyway, you asked me, I'm
You can,
yeah.
you can.
The next part I love is just this whole idea of learning. Like neuroscience, actually, Neuro Leadership Institute, they have an acronym called AGES, which is when you want to learn something, you've got to focus your attention on it. You've got to try and generate your own ideas off it. You've got to feel emotionally connected to it.
Mm.
And then the last part of that is you've got to have spacing. And I think that one of the things that we don't do well enough is you can read a book or you can read an article and then like immediately, so an hour later somebody says, what was the article about? And you're like, I don't know, right? Like, so one of those things was missing. You either didn't get the attention or you didn't get some emotional connection to it. But most often it's that you didn't get spacing happening. And so spacing is that time to go like, okay, I'm just going to pause. I'm going to take some space. I'm going to think about it later on, capture some ideas and those sorts of things so that you're actually really absorbing and creating some of the information that you're thinking about and learning about. So yeah, so I think there's some brain hacks in there.
Mm.
The some of the others, like the other one that I would just mention is that I'm a big believer in awesome hours. Um, so most days I try to have at least two awesome hours, which are 2 hours where I'm just doing the work that I need to do as a creative and as a leader, that aren't meeting people and those sorts of things. Now, for me, often those awesome hours are at that cafe first thing in the morning. One of my team, she's not a morning person. Her awesome hours are between 11 and 1, right? And like, so
Wow.
like, well, then you've got to block out time between 11 and 1 to do your best work, and in the best place that you can, because that's kind of, again, it's like, how do you make sure that you're getting the best out of what you're trying to pull off? Um,
Mm.
so
Hey,
yeah.
to prove your point about reading an article and not remembering ages, what was the A for?
Attention.
That's hilarious. And I'm genuine in asking that because
Yeah, yeah,
I'm making a few notes. I absolutely love it. And I like the idea of the emotional connection. It
yeah.
just amplifies things. The other thing, and this will tell listeners how I'm a bit weird too. I remember, probably 15 or so years ago now, when I was on a bit of a visualization uh journey, and I had some pictures and some quotes, and I laminated them and put them up in the shower. And then I'd
Fantastic.
see them every day. Oh, I'd forgotten about that. That's so cool.
Fantastic.
So cool. So, given that this podcast is 5 a.m. Tuesday, what are some of the common challenges that people face in choosing to prioritize their growth, and perhaps a bit about how they can overcome that?
The It's all about time.
Mm,
Um, I mean, that's the most common issue that we have generally is how am I choosing where I'm going to spend my time?
yeah.
And for all of us, we have so many commitments and so much things and so many things that are wanting to take our time from us. And so when you're talking about growth or stepping outside of your comfort zone or learning or blank space time, it's like, how am I going to make the time for that? And that's not dissimilar to how am I going to exercise or how am I going to do things. And so for me, a large part of it is how am I going to make the habits to make sure that I can do those things. So I'm lucky enough to kind of, to a large degree, have control over my time.
Mm,
But there's some things that I do. I protect Mondays fiercely. So I would say like 90% of my Mondays, I have zero meetings on a Monday.
Yeah.
And so I just protect that. And that's a time thing for me so that I can actually make sure I'm doing strategic and creative work and all of those sorts of things. Ironically, to protect a Monday, you have to do a really good job on a Friday of closing all the loops. And so, and so one thing begets the other. So it's like if you arrive and you're going to do growth time and your phone's ringing and you've got emails that have gone unanswered and all that stuff, it's really, really hard to switch off and actually choose what you're going to do to grow and learn and all of those sorts of things. So you have to have some tricks and habits for making sure that you're kind of setting up for that time. And so, I would say like choose a time, even if it's once a week, put it in your calendar. If it's half an hour, then 15 minutes before that, before you even drive there or walk there or whatever you do to go there, I would say choose a different space. Then just write down all the shit that you got to do beforehand,
Yeah.
so it's off your mind, so that you kind of get this mind like water, so that you are just feeling open to go and do whatever it is that you're going to do.
Mm.
But yeah, choosing the time is where and when is the biggest things, and then trying to protect that. And you might be able to, a lot of people will go, I can never allocate a whole Monday to it. But like maybe it's half an hour, but choose where and when you're going to do that, and then try and get in the habit of doing that once a week, every week, and see how you go. So yeah.
Oh, look, absolutely. And I know I'm not alone with this, that to fit an extra half hour or hour in my day, I get up at 5 a.m.
Yep.
I get up early, and I've done it for such a long time now that it has become quite a habit. So I say this often when speaking to guests on the show, that we need to get you back. Like, we can explore so many topics on here. Your knowledge is incredible. Through
Thank
all
you.
that learning, you've also inspired me to go and finish some books.
Fantastic.
I've got a lot of books that I've started. So, yeah, any final words of wisdom before we sign off?
No, I give up on books as well. So like, I think that's one of the, actually just going like, oh, I'm done with this book and being out of it. There's some creative ways of doing that, but that's a conversation for another day.
Oh,
But yeah, but I just encourage people, like I just genuinely believe that we all have in us this creative potential.
mm.
And I often ask, I remember standing in a room of a couple hundred people and going, put your hand up if you think you're creative. And maybe half a dozen
Oh, yeah,
people put their
true.
hand up. And I'm like, okay, so we're all creators. Some people love creating spreadsheets. That's their way of doing creative. Other people love baking or painting houses or doing things, but we're all innately creative. And so I think it's the challenge is to just enable yourself and to create space and time to get out and kind of try some of that creativity for yourself. Be awesome.
Yeah. And I'm thinking we're just through the school holidays here in New Zealand. So I'm thinking, mums, I'm sure you had to get creative in finding things for your children to do during this. It's everywhere, right? That's a really
Yeah.
good comment.
Yeah.
Really good comment. Well, thank you very much. We need to
Thank
sign off
you.
today, but I have a feeling we'll do this again. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for sharing with us.
Thank you. Ka kite.
Okay. Oh, here we go. My guy